We're good.
Okay. So this meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the March 14th meeting of the City of Asheville Noise Advisory Board. My name is Jessica Thomason. I am the chair and voting member of this board. All committee members and staff are participating virtually today. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website, and also linked to the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you out there that are with us today, welcome. We'll now go through and introduce all the board members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphones if you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, please unmute your microphone. Board members, as I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Charles Beck.
Here.
Rick Freeman.
Here.
James Corbin Harwood. James is not here. Anoop Krishan. Anoop is not here. Carmelo Papalonio.
Here.
Jeff Santiago.
Here.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Hello.
Also with us today are several staff members, Granye Miser, Daniel Oropesa,
Hello.
Haley Mahoney,
Hi.
Ben Woody,
Hey, everybody.
and I believe Chris Collins is with us as well.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so our first agenda item today is going to be to see if there's any discussion of the minutes from the February 17th meeting. Anything to discuss from our last meeting minutes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Charlie Beck is first approval. Can I get a second motion to approve?
I second.
Carmelo, do you approve?
That was me, Jeff.
Oh, that was you. Okay.
Yeah.
We got a second motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so February 17th minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone. Our next agenda item will be a staff report so that we will hear from Daniel and Granye.
I'm gonna present here. Hello, everybody. Nice to see everybody again. What was my noise report? Everybody got a copy of the staff report, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So let's just get choosy from the norm from what we have. We're pretty much keeping the format because it seems to be working in terms of getting the information that's needed. Yeah, I can see that. We had 108 complaints for the last 30 days since we stopped taking count last month before our last board meeting. One of the jumps that we are seeing here, which is good for us, is actually more people are going online to submit their report, to report their complaints, which is a big jump, especially over some of the colder weather that we've had. So we noticed that 25 online calls is actually a lot from what we've had when we first launched it. Some of the trends pretty much stay the same. We knew that residential neighbor complaints would remain the same, and multifamily apartment complexes, 38 of the 65. We knew that was coming. That's just because it's a norm of multifamily living. Trash recycling, we were actually excited and happy to see 0. That's one of those, one of the areas of our complaints that's doing very well. Something that we're going to be changing that's been a topic of conversation for the last couple of meetings. Some of the board members had a little bit of there was a little bit of confusion of how the APD calls were coming in, how they were being responded to, and how we were closing them out, for lack of a better word, in terms of an investigation. We always had just the closing code of APD, which you have seen on some of your records, but we've decided to update that just so it gives a little more context as to what actually happened with that call, since we're only privy to the morning email of what happened the night before regarding a noise complaint. So we used to always close it out at the end of our investigation. Say, for example, APD complaint came in. We'll keep something easy. Say the lady in apartment 4 was making too much noise, and we had all her information, etc. Well, we would follow up with the complainant. We would follow up with sometimes with the noisemaker or the property manager. And then that same night, there was an issue where there was a fight in a parking lot and somebody heard gunshots. And those are calls that we would not be responding to because we are not sworn in officers and we're not trained or authorized to handle situations like that. But unfortunately, both of those calls were getting closed as APD. So as a matter of just for the 2 different calls, it had the same closing code. So it caused a little bit of confusion. So what we decided to do was we were going to keep the APD code for anything that APD went, they handled, they responded, they resolved it. It's a perfect world. Right? Even in some of those, we might follow up just to make sure they're okay, especially if it's a multifamily apartment complex, because still a lot of the complainants don't know that they can go to their property manager to report the incident. So that way there's a case on that apartment if anything further needs to be done, such as even as far as an eviction. What we've decided to do on those calls where it is a law enforcement function, such as gunshots. Just this morning, we got one. There was gunshots and so forth. We're going to close it now as APD2. These are non-DSD functions that would be a law enforcement function. Domestic violence. I'm trying to think of other ones.
Speeding cars.
Speeding cars with no mufflers, drag racing, motorbikes going in a neighborhood, things like that we cannot enforce or respond to. Those we're going to start closing out as APD2. And then the second one we're going to add is APD3. There's a percentage of calls that come in that we don't have a phone number, we don't have a name, sometimes we don't have an address. Basically, the person will call APD and say, there's loud noise coming from the street. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to give my name or phone number. And that's what's on the note, loud noise. There's really not much we can do with that. So if we go back up here, you'll notice that this past month, we had 70 calls that came in through APD. So we were able to respond. Out of those 70, 51 of those calls we actually followed up with. So that means we've gotten in touch with the complainant or the noisemaker or management, any way, shape, or form. We've had information and we followed up with 51 of those 70 calls. 12 of those calls of the 70 were law enforcement functions. A lot of them had to do with underage drinking in parking lots or gunfire. We had a couple of domestic violence. Even one was arrested in one of them. Situations that administrative staff here can't handle. And 5 of those 70 calls, we did not have any information. No email, phone number, not even a name. So there's really nothing we can do. That is a dead end call, especially when it's maybe a private residence area. They'll say it's in the block, the intersection of Biltmore and Patton. And there's no information on what it is, not even if it's from a car, a bar, a protester, there's nothing. So that's a dead end. So that's going to be, we have not done the change. So the reports that you have do not reflect these changes. These will be in the next.
We'll have it for the next meeting
for the
on the dashboard.
For the next meeting, they'll be there. Before I continue, does anybody have questions on those changes? We're good? Oh, yes, Rick. Oh, that's for.
So on the 50, so I thought I understood this completely because we talked about this when we set the agenda, but I thought about it some more.
No worries.
Of the ones that are going to stay categorized as APD, so not APD2 or APD3, how do we know what the actual resolution was?
So that's it. Okay.
For which one?
I can take that. So the ones that are purely APD, Rick, the top one. So the notes will tell us, they'll say, went to the apartment, listened for noise, heard noise, ask complainant or ask, tenant to turn it down. In some cases, they may give them a verbal warning. So the detail in the notes that we see is what determines whether it's been something that's been addressed completely by APD in the field. If we can, we'll still follow up, as Daniel said, with some of those calls, but some of them are purely by the notes. We can tell that they've been addressed completely. Verbal warning given, something like that.
And if by the time they got there was no noise source, or they couldn't narrow it down,
that's when we'll circle back. That's part of those 51 calls. We'll still follow up on those ones.
I guess the real question for me is, since that's still going to be a fairly large percentage, how do we decide what the trends are and what probable actions we would take, either by broader education or, because they end up, even the 51 you follow up on, they still stay coded as APD. So when we look at this, they don't.
No,
No, those ones will be coded with a DSD code.
Okay. So we basically, okay.
So they might be IM for a little while, Rick. If we're watching something, if we're working with the property manager or monitoring it, they may be something that's resolved right away. They may be something that we've sent a letter to as a follow-up, so a written warning will be issued. So no, the main chunk of what you see there, those 51 calls, I guess how we look at it is that the medium that it arrives to us is APD, but it's still handled by DSD. Does that?
So the closure codes will change based on what you discover.
Yes, sir. Yes. They will be DSD closure codes. So the ones that are just going to be purely APD closure codes on the dashboard, when we fine tune it a little bit, will be things that were actually resolved in the field by APD at that moment in time. And anything that has an opportunity for further investigation or for further resolution will be something that DSD will follow up. Sometimes they'll get there and the noise has stopped, but that doesn't mean DSD won't follow that up the next day. We will do. And sometimes we can then take that to the next step and get a resolution on that. So the APD closure codes should be, because they'll be more streamlined, it'll just explain, even though, some comes in at JOT form, some comes in at APD, regardless of how it comes to us, we will follow up wherever we can. So the only circumstances that DSD will not follow up is there's no contact information, it's a law enforcement function, or APD has closed it out as a completely resolved issue. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sonia, I have a follow-up question on that. At the end of the day, when we look back on this at the 1-year anniversary, how are you going to measure the impact, positive or none at all or whatever, to the things that you've done here? I mean, we can look at lists, we can see trends, but how are you going to measure the impact?
Well, the goal obviously will be to reduce the number of noise complaints that are coming to the city, Charlie. That will be a big number for us to look at. The ones that we can close out. Sometimes they're resolved. It doesn't mean they won't come back up in time. We can hope that they won't, but sometimes they will, particularly in a residential setting. So I guess we will measure our success as how we've been able to partner, collaborate, and ultimately resolve noise complaints. And I think resolving them is, in some cases, a violation and a citation may be issued. Sometimes resolution comes in other forms too. And so really what we're going to be looking at, Charlie, from our data that we get daily is patterns. If we start seeing patterns of things rising up again, then there clearly hasn't been resolution.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is that, as we eventually make our way towards recommendations to City Council, then we should be able to point to them to say, if we tweak the ordinance, a year from now to do A and B because of the identification of the impact, then I think that has more substance to it to a council member than us just saying, well, we read a list, we had a lot of, complaints, and
Absolutely.
Things might have happened, they might not. I guess I always start everything with an outcome in mind. So,
Right.
so if I have an idea what the outcome is, that becomes my measurement.
I think the other thing, Charlie, I agree with you totally. And I think the other thing is that as staff, we'll no doubt recommend to the board areas that we have found that are challenging for us to enforce, or things that areas of the ordinance that work really well. And so I hope that there's that, uniformity of us as a group of problem solvers here, where we're going to come to the board and say, this is a difficult part of the ordinance to enforce for us. This is a very difficult part of the ordinance. This is an easy part of the ordinance. This part works really well. This part doesn't. And I hope that the board feels comfortable to know that staff will certainly bring that, not just the data, but the experience of actually working and handling and managing calls to the board where we find that we're hitting roadblocks or it's really difficult for us to do that. So I think there's a data part of it, and there's also the experience part of it. So I totally agree with you that those are, that's where I see us bringing that information. So it'll be data and also experience of staff.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to some of our challenges that we're still seeing. Obviously, one of the newer ones, obviously, is the no contact info available. Just brings us to a dead end. Today's Monday. We get a complaint at 123 Main Street. We have no information, no contact. We can't do anything with it. But then 2 weeks later, now we get into the second part of the chronic complainant. I complained about this 2 weeks ago, but you did nothing about it. Well, I didn't know who you were, or you didn't give us any information. So it brings us into two different things, two of the same thing here, when we have no contact information, but then there are some in the public that have expectations that we're going to resolve something with limited information. So that makes our job really, really difficult sometimes, and very confrontational sometimes. And on that same note, with some of our chronic complainants, we have subjective complaints. We get this a lot in public space areas, especially with buskers. We're seeing a lot of complaints that are content versus noise complaints. So they'll call and complain, and they don't want this person out there because they don't like what they're saying. And unfortunately, we cannot control that. We do have freedoms in this country. People have rights to express their beliefs and what they believe in. And there's a difference between content and noise. And that has been proven with us, and sometimes in the field, where somebody says, well, there's a violinist there, he doesn't bother me. But the lady who preaches about Jesus, you need to move her out. So obviously there's a problem. That's there.
Challenging.
And it's very hard when you have to approach, because we do respond to all the calls and we make contact with both artists, musicians, and protesters. And it gets very confrontational, because they do have a right. What's the problem? I'm not amplified. I'm exercising my right. So you are no one to tell me that I have to be quiet. And guess what? They're right, because they're not doing anything wrong. But the complainant will continue calling us, sometimes every day, saying that they want these people removed. So that makes it very difficult. Goals met. Field work outreach has been great. As a matter of fact, Friday night we went out and did one. We have somebody has a question. Rick, you have a question regarding the challenges?
Do we have an action plan for addressing these challenges, or some kind of idea what you want to do?
Well, I think that's something, Rick, that we will continue to work on and continue to bring to the board. It is a challenge, and it sometimes becomes quite hostile. So, explaining to complainants that we have no control over content is something we do explain to them, but we'll still, try and get out in the field as much as we can. If you address a volume issue, sometimes with people who might be preaching, they then perceive that you're after them for their content. So it's walking a fine line a lot of the times, and sometimes they are loud. So you've got to be very clear. It's difficult to explain to people who are more concerned about content than volume, that's really not a role that we have in that. And they're frustrated, and I understand that, but we have to be really definite about our role in this, and our role is a volume-based rather than a content-based issue. So I think right now we'll probably continue to try and, we try and mediate those situations where we can. We try and go out in the field as much as we can, but I think it's something that we will certainly start, keeping data and bringing back to the board. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is a challenge for staff. This is an area that's really difficult to enforce.
So are you saying you don't feel like you have enough trend to engage in some form of education or public communication? So you don't want action yet, or?
Well, I think we do it. We do engage with the complainants on the difference between noise and content, but that it does seem to repeat itself a little bit. So we're trying to engage with people when they complain about that and try and ask the right questions. So we're getting to the point that this is a volume issue rather than a content issue. But it does happen. We're just noting it as something that is difficult to separate.
And now we're in warmer months, so
Yeah.
we are seeing more musicians, buskers out now in just the last couple of weeks than we have in the past winter. So it'll take us at least another month or two to really see what's really happening now that there's more buskers coming into town.
Okay, it's my nature that when staff is saying this is making our job hard or a little risky, that you're expecting either the go ahead to take some action or recommendations from the board on what action to take. I'm just trying to be clear on, at this stage, is communication your only objective? Or just as a, for example, if there's no contact info, and that's coming from APD calls, is there anything we want to do with APD to change the narrative? When the person says, I don't want to give this information, should the call person be saying to them, well, in that case, our chances of solving this are substantially reduced, or something like that? I just hate to see this here every month for the next 9 and do nothing about it. That's my concern. If I put myself as the caller calling APD and I say to them, this is a problem of whatever, there's gunshots, I don't know, just for lack of a better example, and I say I definitely don't want to get involved, I don't use my name or phone number, that's my right, and they need to respect that. I don't think that there's no changing that. We do see that some dispatchers saying, if you want to do this, if you want to move this any further, you can also contact the noise department, and we do see it in their notes. And most times we don't get a hit on that. Maybe only once or twice there's been a match on a possible address or area, and then somebody did reach out to us. But even online, they're not required to put in their information. And once again, there was no name, no phone number, there was nothing. So at least they tried. They really want to get it out there, but for some reason that we don't know, they really don't want their name out there, and we just have to respect that. It's just one of the losses.
I think to go back to the content, Rick, a lot of those calls are coming to us not through APD, but they're coming through job forum. And so, there's a role for us to communicate with the complainant that we can't address the content. And there's also, when we go in the field and engage these preachers or protesters, that there's a role for us to explain to them that we're not there to regulate their content too. So I think it's a little early to say, but believe me, this is the type of thing that I think staff will bring to the board, where it just becomes very challenging for us to actually make any headway in those cases. There are cases where people will specifically highlight content to us in a complaint, and when we follow up with that call, we will just reiterate that's not something we can regulate in any way. But when we engage with those parties in the field, we will also emphasize to them that we're not there about their content, we are there about their volume. So I think it's a little early yet, but I do think this is something that staff will this is the type of thing that staff will definitely come to the board and say, as problem solvers, how do we problem solve this? Or what is a resolution that we can use in the field to help us be able to move these kinds of cases on.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going back to, we had sent out an email to all the venues that we had been in touch with last season. Now that more venues are opening up, we did send each venue an email letting them know for us to take proactive noise readings, especially if they're going to be having live music, so forth. We have we actually did one Friday night. We have 2 more lined up for March and a couple in April once venues start opening up. And that just not only gives us an opportunity to start a relationship with some of the venue owners. There's still noise out there. So, when am I supposed to shut the music off? And that's not just from the venues, but from complainants. And there is no time to shut the music off. So these are things that Grania Nights, we meet them in person. It's a nice relationship. We can text each other. It just makes it easier as an initial meeting of being proactive and friendly and educational versus I got to complain on you. So that going out Friday night was great to hear an actual live band, their sound check. We were out till 11 p.m. making sure we're doing the town Friday night, and went to 2 different venues. One was in education. We did not receive a complaint, but Grania and I kind of thought the music was a little on the borderline. So we actually went in, spoke to the staff. They adjusted their music. And so before we got a complaint, we actually went. And I'm going to do a follow-up with them as well, sending them a report, letting them know where their decibel levels were. Even though we didn't get a complaint, it's good for the venue owner to know, because sometimes the venue owners are not there. It's good for them to know that, hey, we were there. Your music was on the fence of a possible violation. So make sure you guys stay in check. Let us know if you need help with that. And all the venues have been very receptive.
Mm-hmm.
They've been great. They've been great, actually. Decibel level readings. There is, I'm going to switch over here. Did everybody get the page that we created for decibel levels? So Anya, we fixed a little glitch. Haley and I this morning, we did a quick settings in the report. That way everybody can see them. So pretty much anytime we've taken a noise level reading, we are now linking that report to a report that you can see. So you just basically hover over report, of course, and pretty much you can just open it. And it just pretty much gives you the date, where we were, which is the actual address for this one. This was actually for a,
Hey, Daniel, I think you need to switch your tab, please.
Oh, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you. Should know this from our morning meetings. Thank you, Tom.
So that one was follow-up from an actual complaint that we received. And we just went out in the field and
let me see here. For example, like here, Ben's Tuneup back in November, I guess it was. Ben's Tuneup, you just click over it. It's a PDF, pretty much. It'll give you the time and date that we were there, the venue or the location or whatever it was. Ideally, in terms of our decibel levels, the way they are written in our ordinance would be the LAEQ right here.
It's in a different
You'll
tab.
need to switch your tab one more time. What you can do is just at the top of your screen, there should be an option to present this tab instead.
I got it, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dan.
I'm going to do my whole screen. I'm going to do my whole screen. Do my entire screen. This will be better.
you see that now?
Oh, it's coming. Is it better? There we go. So going back, for example, Mills Gap Road, we had gotten complaints about an industrial location next to a multifamily, pretty much saying, it's too loud, it's too loud. Pretty much Grania and I went out that night. We started at almost 9 o'clock. We left at about 9:30. We did notice the place that they were referring to. There's a lot of numbers that are thrown out here with our noise level meters, but the ones that you should be familiar with are the LAEQ. That's the average of the decibel level reading that we're getting. And on the bottom of each of the note, it pretty much just has a quick note as to what we did on the bottom, just to summarize those numbers. So measurements were taken in response to a complaint. That's why we were there. They were taken from multiple locations at Hawthorne at Mills Gap Apartments, which is a pretty large complex, and there was no violation at that time. If these in fact were higher numbers and something that would have to be addressed with the industrial plant, with the factory, then we would have moved on. But in terms of the numbers that we received, and we were there for a while, we got as close to the plant as we can get, and then as far away from the plant where the complainant was calling from, and there was no violation. If I switch over, I think this was Ben's that I opened up, Ben's Tuneup. Measurements taken in response to a complaint on 11/22. So just that night of the 24th, I happened to be out. So I drove by the area where the complainant said that she kind of hears the music from, and Ben's did have music on that night. So I pretty much took it there unannounced. Ben's Tuneup didn't know I was there, and they were well within their decibel level readings from that. And I've been in touch with the owner, and now Ben's is one of those, one of the venues who jumped on to do proactive readings. So when they have a DJ, they'll know where they should be in terms of decibel levels. And that way this gives me the opportunity to go to at least 3 or 4 different points in that area to see how loud they are and what's the loudest and what's the lowest. So everybody on the board should have access to that. Is it always, hey Haley, do you know is it always sent through our meeting documents, or does the board have access to this at any time? Like the public board? I don't remember.
They would be able to go back to where it was linked at any time in a past agenda, or we can make it live as a standing link underneath the current dashboard link that we have. That might be a good idea.
Okay.
Antoinette, you have a question?
Yeah, and pardon me for stepping in, but when you're talking about proactive readings, it made me wonder if we've done proactive readings for folks in Kenilworth relating to noise coming from Mission. And if we haven't, can we?
We can, absolutely. If somebody wants to request that, we're happy to do that. Councilwoman, we'll go, whether it's somebody that, you know, whether we're working with a venue to make sure they're compliant, or a neighbor or complainant to see if there's a violation, we're happy to do it either way. That's all we need is a request to do it, and we'll definitely do it. We just need to have, just because there are only 2 of us, sometimes it may take, it could be next week before we can schedule it, but yes, all we need is a request to do it. We're happy to.
And so can I be the one who makes that request, or does it have to be that? Okay, thank you.
Of course. You've got my email. Just yeah, shoot me an email, and we'll certainly schedule some time to go out there. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Carly, you have a question?
Yeah, to Grania and Daniel. So as you go out and take these measurements, and they prove obviously not to be in violation of the current ordinance, but we're finding a trend that they tend to draw a lot of complaints, is it logical to conclude that maybe the decibel levels are currently too high?
That's not for me to,
Yeah.
that's not for me to make a decision on.
Yeah.
I'm out there to enforce what we have in writing.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes. Sometimes it gets a little problematic with the complainant, where I'm saying I can only enforce what the ordinance is. I've heard it. I can be next to it. You know, to me, it's not loud, or it is loud. I agree with you or not. That's my opinion. I can only enforce what I have in writing. And if then that becomes problematic, then we will see a trend in saying, hey,
Yeah.
we're obviously we're getting 20 complaints
Yeah.
from this place. Everyone was mad, but they were in compliance. We will bring that right to the
Yeah.
board and say, clearly we have a problem with this location or the decibels, but I can't be a judge of that.
Right, and that in essence was what I was getting at, not that I was looking for you to say I've got to move the
We
enforcement
certainly
piece.
will look for that, Charlie, absolutely, and say, you know, that this is what our data shows, that even at, you know, X decibels, we're still getting this many complaints. And so that's maybe where those decibels may need to be looked at, adjusted, modified in some way. So for sure, and you know, that's obviously the benefit of having a season or a year's worth of data. In some cases, not for all noise, I would say. Some noise is not seasonal at all, but a lot of it is. And so yeah, I think taking those readings, taking them consistently, we try and, you know, be very mindful of where we're taking them, where we try and take them where the ordinance asks us to take them, which is at the receiving property. So, you know, and trying to be consistent if we're going back time and time again to be in the same place when we're taking that. But the ordinance does ask us to take the readings at the receiving property, which typically is the complainant's property. Doesn't have to be, but typically that's what it is. We don't have staff to be out anymore, sort of just taking readings just at will. So it is typically complaint based, as you guys know, and we will, you know, once we get the property owner's permission to actually enter their property to take a reading, that's where we will try and go back to each time if it's a repeat.
Rick?
So one question or one comment related to Charlie's question. You typically end up talking to the person who complains, and they tell you something about why they complained, right?
Okay.
I can't hear my TV set, my windows are rattling, I just hate rap music, whatever it is. Could you start to sort of collect the answers you're getting when it's not a violation according to the decibels that are set?
Absolutely.
You know, right now I think it'll start off just seeming somewhat random, but if when we see these, if a trend starts to appear, my kids can't sleep, my daughter can't study, my, you know, whatever, I think that's the best you guys can do in educating us on the reason that the decibels that we've set are not satisfying people. But I don't know if a trend will ever appear, but I know when we worked on this in the beginning, we were getting look, my windows rattle. I can't even carry on a conversation in my living room. Now, those were probably back in the days when that guy was getting hit by 85 decibels loud and clear right there. And, you know, maybe everybody has done better, but anything we can collect.
Sure.
We could sort of like keywords, you know, like if we could have keywords in your notes or something we could go back and search for.
Absolutely. I think, Rick, when we put an awful lot of detail in our conversational notes that we have in our daily noise complaints. I mean, some of them are just this long. We absolutely capture things. So not just keywords, but expressions that people use, or tell me a little bit about your experience. Tell me a little bit about the noise. So we do capture a lot of that information. And I do think that's very important to have, because it's a descriptive rather than us to, you know, it's a human's experience in conjunction with the decibel reading. But we do also explain to people before we go out and take a decibel reading that, you know, the hearing music or something being audible doesn't equate to a violation always. And we try and be really upfront about that and say, you know, I understand you can hear music, and we'll certainly go out, or you can hear, you know, whatever the noise source may be. If it's decibel related, it doesn't mean it's a violation just because you can hear it. If it's trash collection, that's a whole different ballgame. And we'll get to that later in the meeting because I've put that on. But yes, we do certainly capture the description from that person, but we also are realistic and I think fair to people to say, we'll certainly go out and take decibel readings, but please understand that if they come back in underneath what that a prescribed decibel level is for that zoning district, they are in a position of compliance. It's not saying it's not something that's audible to you, and it's not saying that's something that's problematic to you, but we can't change that under the current circumstances. And so we absolutely will record that in our notes so that, yeah, that not just the data, but the content that we get from those complainants is captured as well.
Okay, and then I had two comments on the stuff you showed. One, you take numerous readings, but we don't know where those numerous readings are. You know, so I can't tell when the reading is close to the origination property and when it's at the residential property. So I think that would be necessary if we were near the limit, to just that the readings would have some measurement of where they are.
Right. If you go through them, Rick, if you go through each one on the bottom, I've tried to put in terms of a summary note in terms of saying even if they were in violation or the decibel was higher when we showed up, if it was proactive, if it was in response to whatever, it would show where I did write in where the measurement was taken from, because there are some points where we have to be in. Just Friday from one location, we were at 6 different points, none of which were significant. But if one of them were, it would actually be noted on the bottom, say the significant one started from the receiving point of 11, whatever, Main Street. It would be noted on the bottom because there are too many. If I'd have to put a note on each, remember this goes from, as the board, I'm glad I can express part of my frustration with taking some of these readings and being out in the field. There's so much data and sometimes it's so detailed that it's hard to summarize and compile into one little lump. There's right now you're talking about keywords and things that we were saying that we have to be careful. And I say I have to be careful in terms of what my job is in terms of enforcement and applying the ordinance versus creating a study for the city, which is something completely different. How many times are people complaining about this, or how many? That's an easy exit to doing a study for the city versus what I'm supposed to do. So adding all these details and putting this in there, if I have a direction as to where this information is going and what's being done with it, that makes it easier for me to say, okay, I can actually do this. But then adding on the detail of where I was standing, where I was doing, make sure you capture all the keywords. I'm going to spend half my day doing administrative, trying to pinpoint something versus actually going out and responding to things. So I have to be very careful with that. So we'll try, what I will do is on each of those, trying to think of one where we did so many.
We voice tag them also, Rick.
But that's not available.
No, but it is available to us. So if you wanted to have a deeper look into something, we voice tag. So we'll say, intersection of Main Street and 8th Street.
Right.
And then we'll start taking the readings. So there's very specific locations as to there. What you're seeing in the summary reports there are generalizations for sure. If we wanted to get into something more deep, we certainly could, but I'm not sure we are in a position to have those on individuals. So you've got a summary of 6 readings, but the individual readings will give much more detail about where we were standing, what our location was when we took that.
Yeah, unfortunately, the report that's generated from the noise reader doesn't automatically download. So that would have to be keyed in. But for example, it would be easy to say, hey, we have a problem with, whatever, ABC bar, and we actually did take readings. That is actually easy to say if we were to say, hey, let's do a deeper what happened. That could be easily detailed as to one, but for every single one, especially now with season opening up with music venues, it'll be a lot harder to pinpoint every single one because it doesn't download like on a sheet, like an Excel sheet or a spreadsheet. But if there was a specific case,
we voice record where we are taking the reading from. So if we have a complainant that's asking us to come and take a reading from them, we're recording where we're standing when we're taking that reading.
Right.
Okay. And then the last thing was the example you gave where it was industrial noise. Mm-hmm. Industrial noise might fit those categories of additional decibel reductions. You know, if you go back to the decibel thing in the ordinance, it's like if it's a continuous sound,
Right.
or if it,
Yeah.
So it would be helpful, because I know those are going to be rare, so I don't think I'm putting a big burden on you guys. It would be helpful if, when you're measuring industrial noise, whether you would say in the notes
Whether it is, we can do that.
whether, because I don't know what
Right.
level
In
to
this
compare
case, it
against when I
wasn't.
see that
Yeah.
that report.
I got you. That's fair. That's fair point. And in this case, it wasn't a continuous noise, but yeah, we would certainly do that. And actually, when we're looking at a continuous noise like that, we're looking at a much lower decibel level anyway, because the ordinance actually does reduce it additionally for continuous noise. So yes, but we certainly can do that. In this case, it was not a continuous noise. It was sporadic, but not a continuous noise, that like something that's just repeated all the time. But we certainly can do that. I think the other thing, Rick, that would probably help with some of what you're asking here too, is when we would so the Cirrus report is the data. Again, it's a little bit like the dashboard, whereas the field report that we would send to the complainant and to the business owner has a little bit more meat and bone to it, in that we would say, you know, that this is the decibel level that would be required by the ordinance, and we will put that in there. These are the decibel levels we received. We took the readings at this point and stood for, you know, staff were on site for an hour. We took 6 readings, and so there would be a little bit more detail in those field reports. And again, I think you had asked that before, Rick. Both parties will get a copy of those field reports as well.
And the board does not get a copy of those field reports?
We've shown you some, but you're welcome to have those. I think we had put some in our staff report last month when we were starting to do these proactive field reports. So we can make those available to the board, but whoever is the complainant will get a copy of it, and also the business owner, operator, venue owner, whatever they are. Yes.
You know what? Actually, what I can do based on this conversation, when I do the quick summary, I'll have a template on my laptop, so it's a copy and paste. Depending on where we were, I'll put the zone, the maximum decibel, depending on the hour. That way, when you're looking at your numbers, you'll know if that person fell within or not. Would that sound better? So on the bottom, it'll actually say what zone it was, what's the maximum decibel level, and it's correlating to the time.
I have no problem reading the field report. I don't really want to make you guys do extra work. So if you're doing all that for the benefit of the person who complains and the person that was the source was there, you know, as it relates to decibels, what are we looking at? 25, 30 readings out of the hundreds of complaints you've got. For me as a board member, I don't mind having one more link or 2 more links in this worksheet that goes to the reports that you wrote. I would read those, and that would answer all my questions, I think.
Okay. So we can.
I don't really want you to duplicate stuff unless there's something in the reports you send that violate privacy and all that kind of stuff.
We would probably need to redact the
owner,
complainant and owner information, but that's, you know, we can do that.
Okay.
It's
that's easy. That I can do. That's easy.
Good.
So the other thing I think to remember too, Rick, is with a lot of the complaints that we've had that we don't have decibel levels are, we weren't present in the moment on those, and many of those are going to be the noise disturbance standard. So we wouldn't be able to take decibel readings for them.
Right.
So you know, this is part of the challenge we have as staff, is 2 people trying to respond to all the noise complaints in the city. So that's why we're trying to do the proactive ones. But in the case of the one we just showed you, that was a complaint we responded to. We took readings the other night that we had no complaints on. We just drove by something and we were like, whoa, that sounds kind of loud. Jumped out of the car, took readings, went across the street, spoke to the venue owners, and they were great. But so it you know, a lot of what we're seeing, particularly what's coming in from residential, obviously we wouldn't have a decibel reading in those cases anyway. So
Yeah.
but yeah, we can definitely get you access to those reports. They're going to be very similar to the one that I think we shared to you last month, where we send that to complainant and owner, occupier, venue owner, whatever business, whatever it is, so that everybody is seeing the same thing. And I think we had mentioned this too, that we are trying to be really transparent and fair to people and say that if we're going to take a decibel reading, this may or may not work out the way you want it to, but we'll certainly give you the results of it. So somebody's usually not happy, and it all we can do is work the ordinance decibel levels or work the ordinance requirements that we have, and it's that's sometimes difficult to explain to people that what we find may not always be what they want us to find for both parties. So we just have to kind of ride that wave and present the information we have.
I think Haley's keeping us in check.
Yeah. So anything else with the
I think Haley's
staff report, or is
the
that?
last thing we wanted just to cover is
Give up, Jeff?
Oh, sorry, Jeff.
Did we wear you out?
Yeah, Jeff had his hand raised.
Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I do have a question about our approach to enforcement when it comes to industrial noise, as opposed to, like going to a bar and going, a small business owner. How do you approach Mission for something like this if Mission is in violation?
We approach them like we approach anybody else. We would have to take readings. If we can verify there's a violation, we would, engage with them and let them know what we found, and seek for them to try and mitigate their noise.
Okay. Do you think we'd have the same response from someone like that versus small business owners?
I have no idea. If
It's the same for developers too,
I'm sorry?
And same for developers.
Right. So as staff, honestly, Jeff, if we have a violation situation, a citation it needs to be issued, it will be issued. I really feel like we're not on anybody's side in this regard. If we have data that's telling us there's a violation of the noise ordinance, whether it's music, whether it's, a continuous noise coming from a mechanical source, whether it's a busker in the street, it's our duty as staff to enforce that. That we would approach it the same way.
Okay.
But, thank you for your question. But as far as we're concerned, if there's a violation, there's a violation. Mm-hmm. Who that violation is being issued to really is not of consequence to us. Now, the response to it may well be, but we will, right. If we've got a violation that's verifiable by decibels, or by, if it's a noise disturbance, by Daniel and I using the subjective standard and determining that a noise disturbance has been created, then we will pursue the appropriate citation and fee.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We can bring this up when you bring up the dissecting the breaking down. Haley, we can move on because the last part of the report, Rania can discuss during what she wants to bring up.
Okay, great. And the next agenda item anyways is decibel readings, which we're pretty much there, right? Mm-hmm. So is there anything else to add in regards to decibel readings? Or, as I know that was part of the staff report, is there anything else to add on that? No? Okay, great. So the next thing that were you, Grania?
No, I just think we did. We rolled it all in together.
I mean, we just basically, yeah.
We're efficient.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty efficient, actually. And so
yeah, it was. As a group, we were very efficient. We took two items in one, but that was great discussion. So thank you.
I agree. And so the next agenda item is to talk about the data and expectations. And part of what I wanted to say with that is to the board that obviously Daniel and Graniego put a lot of time and energy into creating all of this information for us, and we've been asking them for a lot of information. They took the time to meet with Rick and I last week to just go over the information that comes from APD. And I just want to ask the board members to make a point to go and check this data out before our meetings, because it's pretty valuable in terms of starting to see where the trends are and where we're seeing, these patterns that we can have an impact. So please make sure you're taking the time and energy to check these things out and to see where there's issues and also to see where things are getting resolved too, because I think that's part of it, is that we're here to see what we can do about noise reduction. And there's plenty of I think already, just as this board is brand new and trying to figure out this information, I think that it's so far has been really interesting to see just how the outreach has been such a the way that the outreach with the multifamily dwellings and also to the venues has been pretty interesting in terms of making some sort of impact. And I think when we look at these trends, we can also see what we can do as a board of connections that we have in the community and reaching out to people. So appreciate everybody's commitment to making sure that you go through all the data that they take the time and energy to put together. And you'll see that there's a link to that data file in case you have not looked at it. There's some pretty good information here in terms of what that data looks like. And Rick's raising his hand. Rick, you want to?
Yeah,
add to
all
that?
All I want to do is, I don't know how many of the board members are spreadsheet capable. It's not actually a skill to desire, but it's one that my career forced me to know everything about, first in Excel and now in Google Sheets. So if anybody needs some training on how to filter the data or sort the data, because just looking at a 750 line spreadsheet and trying to make sense out of it, to use your brain on it, you really can't. You gotta, so like, I started on all the unknowns because that's like the third biggest number of what we get, where the noise source is unknown. So that's a lot. And so it's more than staring at a 750 line spreadsheet to be able to look at this data and make sense out of it. So if anybody needs help or needs a demonstration or anything like that, I would offer my time.
That's great. Thank you, Rick. Any other questions about the data and expectations that we're getting from the board? Okay, great. Moving on to new business. Look at this, ahead of schedule, guys. So we're gonna discuss the boards and commissions restructuring resolution, and I'm gonna turn it over to Rick to talk about that.
So I was aware that some other boards and commissions are fairly unhappy with the proposal that is flowing through the process of eliminating most of the boards and commissions and reconstituting just some of them as working groups. And so I happen to know several people who are on the Urban Forestry Commission, which is a fairly high expertise commission. You got to know about canopies and tree planting ordinances and all that kind of stuff. So I took what they had and took the content out that was tree ordinance specific and put words in here that I thought represented reasons why we would not want to be disbanded. And because Jessica and I were both really busy this past week, we really just wanted to introduce this to you guys, to the rest of the board, and see, do you agree that we should oppose it? I know there was some discussion prior to this meeting about that, and I'm not sure how aware everybody is of what the revised strategy is, but there's certainly not a guarantee that we would stay as a board under the new structure. And we've already written in our annual report that we felt that we would be unable to meet the objectives of the board and our mission if we were not able to perform this work for a full season. So we really got started in January of 22. So we felt we should go all the way through December of 23 before we could be in any position to make recommendations on policy improvements related to the ordinance that was passed last year. So with that, I just would open it for thoughts and conversation. Charlie?
Yeah, Rick, do we know the demarcation between what the new constituted structure would be, where if we were reduced to a working group, if they come back and say, hey, you'll still have your voice through a working group as opposed to livability or whatever grouping they want to put us into, what would be our response to that?
I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of the whole board. I can only speak on behalf of myself, which is, as I understand the new structure, our work would then be presented to one of the 4 major commissions, and they then decide whether we did a good job and whether our policy recommendations are useful or not. If we're lucky enough to get through them, then they present that to a city council subcommittee who gets to decide whether the policy recommendation that they passed is interesting to them or not, before it would go to city council for debate and ordinance change. Whereas today, although we have lost our city council advocate, she dropped out of the meeting. Today, my understanding is if Antoinette is bought into the policy recommendations we choose, then she represents us directly to city council. So there's like 2 layers of bureaucracy between decisions that we could come up with as a majority board and that sort of thing. And that's one of the things that everybody is complaining about, is now you're 2 layers removed from the actual decision makers on policy. So.
Right. Yeah, because I think that, I think your perspective that if we get diluted from, by at least down to 20% of what flows through the 4, because you go from 4 or 21 down to 4. But I also know in some direct dialogue I've had, not about this issue, but about the noise issues in general with the mayor, her attitude is, if it's not on the docket, it's not important for me to deal with it. So, that just kind of strengthens my position for don't dilute us to a point that this issue, which we deemed important less than a year ago, is all of a sudden going to get, kind of swept into the masses. So, I'm a bit concerned that this really dilutes our ability to do what we were asked to do.
Can I take that as you would be in favor of some revised version of this document coming from this team?
I would be, yes.
Okay, who else?
I have a quick comment. I don't know enough about this whole situation to make a vote yet. I would like to know a lot more. This sounds like a large bureaucratic structural change. I guess I would like to know more. I guess, Charlie, this is what you were just getting at. more about what the city council's actual like structural proposal would be. Rick, you mentioned that, as of right now, we have this noise advisory board that we're all on, and we discuss issues and we make proposals and, game plans and suggestions and everything to advise the city council. As far as I know, that goes straight to the council as it's currently structured. And if there's this change, this, consolidation of the boards into 4 advising bodies is what it sounds like they're aiming at, judging by this document. I guess, is that like, that could look a couple different ways. That could be efficient, or that could be just increased bureaucracy. And do we need increased intermediation, or does the existence of these boards, like as separate entities, help with the disintermediation and help, grease the wheels of the advice and efficiency and speed of which things are happening? And then also, Granier and Daniel, like, what would your what would the differences be in how this affects your work, your workflow, your process, and everything like that? Because I mean, you two are going to be staying around and everything. It's the board who you're informing and providing all this, data and information for, that changes. So I guess I don't really know enough about how this affects all the parties at play for me to, jump in and vote yet. Although this is an extremely helpful document. That's just where I'm at right now, personally.
Grania and Daniel, did you want to respond to Carmelo?
Well, I think, Carmelo, we will, whether it's a working group or board, I guess we will be reporting to a group of, whether it's, like I say, whether it's a working group or whether it's a noise advisory board. I agree with you. It's to me, I'm not too sure what the working group, what their influence would have over a bigger group. I'm not familiar with that process. So our job is to manage noise complaints and report them to either the noise advisory board or a working group or whatever is in position to be able to advise as to the effectiveness of it. So I'm not sure that it really changes with us. Well, Daniel and I will work with whoever. I see whether it's a working group or an advisory board. That group, to me, by nature of wanting to be involved in a problem as complex as noise, they're problem solvers. So I feel like we would be reporting in that regard. And the channel to City Council, to me, I'm not really I'm not really familiar with what's being proposed at this time to be able to say. But I assume we would respond, report, collaborate with some other group, if not the board.
Gotcha. So you're still just reporting in the same fashion. It's just like you said, the channels through which those reports and how they're processed to get to City Council. That would be the main change.
Right. Yeah. I guess we would be reporting. Yeah. Through Ben. I guess through our director to whatever group would be making decisions at that point. I'll let Ben to speak to that actually.
Why don't you go ahead, Ben?
So just real quick, that's a good question, Carmelo. I do think, I think the advisory boards are an important function. I think, as it's set up is to guide City Council on policy-ish matters. And I like there's community involvement. It shouldn't be just staff, but just to give a little bit of a perspective from a staff. So we actually, as DSD, we administer 5 boards. So y'all are one of 5 for us. So it does become, for us, it's a lot of work. It's very difficult. So I would just say, in terms of if there's an ability to have logical and meaningful consolidation of these boards, quite frankly, there's some efficiency to be gained, certainly from the staff's perspective. And that may not be the most important perspective, but I do want to say that, you know, it is a tremendous amount of work to do this, especially if you're a department that's managing 3, 4, 5 of these boards, plus what you're supposed to do every day anyways.
So let me add one thing that I've heard, but I don't have confirming information about. Some boards today have working groups. They form a working group and send people off to go work on some problem, and they bring it back to that board. Under the current rules, that working group isn't bound by all of the public input laws. So, for example, we're streaming this live, not because we know there's 100,000 people out there that want to watch it, but because that's what the law says. Is because it's a board and a commission, so we have to stream live. That's part of the public input process. My understanding is working groups don't have that requirement. And so at least some of the heavy duty work that Haley has to do and Daniel has to do to set up the public input things and all that sort of stuff could be lightened. It could simply be, hey, if you want to watch what's going on, here's the Google Meet link. You know, just sign in and sit and listen. So there's a perception that working groups could be less burdensome on city staff, certainly from a tech perspective. And, you know, does Haley have to put out an agenda for a working group each week? Or is it up to Jessica, the chair, to do that work? So those are some of the potential staff labor reductions that still would allow the working group to do what it needs to do, right? We'd still have the same issues that we're trying to get results from. Staff report wouldn't go away because it's only Grania and Daniel that have the background behind what's going on every month to tell us the stories that are necessary to put context around the data. So for that part, if a working group was in place, I think the burden on them would be about the same.
Yeah.
Some of the other stuff might be lesser burden on city staff. Just Rick's opinion again, but this is all about opinion because the city hasn't said they've made up their mind yet. And so this is influencing opportunity while they haven't made up their mind. I hope that helps, Carmelo.
Yeah, it does. So am I wrong to think that one of the major questions here is if the noise advisory board, excuse me, is consolidated into one of these new working bodies, will whatever working body that inherits the noise advisory board's duties have the time and capacity to handle the major issues that we are discussing and analyzing and using to propose things? Like they would, my guess is that they would probably have to take a zoomed out larger picture looking at the forest from the forest rather than the trees to really handle all the granular details of the data, the statistics, everything like that, the educational components and everything. I don't know enough about the bureaucratic restructuring of this. Like once it leaves Daniel and Grania, and then goes through the different channels and everything like that. I think most of us would probably agree that less bureaucracy is better for most governing and advising institutions. So I'm open to hearing both sides, really. Again, everything. Yeah. I that's all I really have as input right now because that's the extent of my knowledge on this.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate all the questions a lot. Charlie.
Yeah, And I think Carmela brings up good points, because my observation point is that you're going to have, let's say they put us in livability. You're going to have the work of currently 5 different advisory boards or structured organizations compressed into one. So now you're just basically taking 5 work elements and putting it on some restructured body of people. And yeah, they can have the working groups, but as I understood it from Antoinette when she was talking pre-meeting with me, is that they align this along the strategic plan of the city. So the only 4 things primarily that are interesting to the city are embodied in those 4 compressed boards that she's talking about. But before we broke off the conversation, I think the whole noise discussion came up after that whole strategic structuring was done some number of years ago. So I'm hopeful, I don't know that I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful that they would give us an opportunity as a newly constituted board, and any other board that was constituted, say, inside the last 12 months, to at least serve out a year of transition before we get, I guess, compressed into any sort of larger board. It's just, I hate to have gone to where we've gone to in the discussions here, and we're beginning to sort the issues out, and then all of a sudden it just gets diluted.
Okay. Jessica or Jeff, either of you, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm on the same page with everyone here. I think what would be helpful, and maybe this is something that we can get, would be what, see what that structure looks like, because I feel the same way with this being something that's brand new. I'm looking at the amount of time and energy that we're putting into this. I know that it's, just even personally, the amount of time that I've put into this, and just wondering, I would be hard pressed to think if I was one of the people on the, if we were under livability and ended up on that board, for instance, right? Just thinking about the amount of time and energy that this takes on top of all of those other pieces, I think it would be really hard pressed to expect as there's so much of us figuring this out with Daniel and Granier together, it seems like that just is, it just seems a lot to ask to put on a group of people that are dealing with 4 other boards, that are advisory boards. So it'd be interesting just to see in terms of like what the working groups look like underneath these 4 categories. Because that's my understanding, right? It would be like these 4 and then working groups underneath them. So there may be a noise working group underneath. Am I understanding that correctly, Rick or Ben?
I've been in.
Sent out some guidance on that. Did you, Haley? Didn't you have some guidance on how it? Okay.
Yeah, on last month's agenda, it was an agenda item, and you all were provided with a link to the webpage that included detailed information on the restructuring.
Yeah, sorry, Haley. I just forgot, it's again, because it's another thing to look at on top of trying to like go through all this data and get all this stuff figured out.
But they have not communicated any intention on what working groups will be created.
Okay.
All they've said is that they perceive working groups have an advantage to attract a more diverse set of folks to them. But at least at the last session I went to, we asked again, a live session with the people, are you going to do an example of what this would pan out to be? What existing boards would you just throw away? Because there's this big claim that there's a bunch of duplication taking place between various boards, like everybody's worrying about affordable housing, the homeless board's worrying about it, somebody else is worrying about it, the economic development board is worrying about it. And are you going to commit to creating working groups? So I don't think now we know, nor should we assume that there would be anything. They could enact it and we'd be done. I mean, whatever data we would have created, that would be in the record, and that'd be the end of it.
And when is this proposed change supposed to happen? of the restructuring? Is there like they want to have this figured out, the city wants to have this figured out by, because I mean, I was part of that first information session that the city did, that like 2-hour thing. And I know a lot has changed since then, because at first it just seemed like there was a lot of unknowns, and like it was a lot of, we're just starting to consider this. And I just haven't had the time or energy to keep up with what that looks like.
So I attended the, what do they call it? Pilot working session. So they have this notion they're going to run a pilot. But when you ask what the pilot's going to be, the answer is we're talking to everybody. They ran 5 sessions over like the last 2 weeks. The one I was in was 2 hours in length. It was a facilitated thing. They asked the attendees a question like, what would you need to know about a working group to be willing to be part of it? And they had the equivalent of a whiteboard and stickies where you could anonymously say, I need to know what we're authorized to do. I need to know who else is, all that kind of stuff. So that's all in the feeding them public input on a pilot. And I think I had heard that they wanted to start to run some kind of a pilot in June. But I couldn't get an answer in that session on how long a pilot was going to run. I made a comment that a pilot needs to run long enough to prove that it's effective, not just to check the box and have 2 meetings and declare a pilot good. So hopefully that session was recorded, so my voice is in there and that sort of thing. So the actual cycle of life is pretty vague to me right now. And I signed up for whatever comes next. I signed up because there's a next step after the sessions, and I signed up to be to participate in that because I care about what we're doing. And in my other volunteer job, I know that we're having a lot of angst in the coalition of Asheville neighborhoods, that neighborhood voices are going to essentially be smushed out of this because the 4 boards are all political appointees. So we could wait, maybe with the uncertainty that's there, it's up to the board to decide whether making a statement is premature or timely. I just bring the data I have to the table to see if that's appropriate now.
Gotcha. Let's, Charlie, I know, and Haley probably has more information on that. So Charlie will, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and I'm being hypothetical, if we ended up in livability, we get meshed together with things like homelessness, affordable housing, maybe tourism. I mean, there's just so many things that I think take away from obviously what we signed up to do here. So even if we, to your last question, Rick, about making a statement, I think certainly in the context of based on what we know and don't know today, we believe it's premature for them to go off and restructure, and even to the point that Antoinette made a comment that probably in a political re-election year, the expedient thing may be just to do nothing and wait. And she may be right. But it just sounds like from what you were describing that, they got a lot of sticky notes, but they haven't necessarily got a mission and a vision. And I hate to see companies or organizations or governments go off and do something that they announce and then haven't thought it all the way through.
Haley?
Yeah, I was just going to say, after the meeting, I'll be happy to resend out that board and commission restructuring info. Also, they just wrapped up the first round of engagement on Friday, those meetings that Rick was talking about, the workshops that they had with the sticky notes and stuff. They'll be taking that information and kind of packaging it for public consumption. So I'll be in touch with that too once it's ready, because once they've looked through that information, they'll have some more to present along, in regards to that timeline. for the pilot and what they're thinking there. They're going to use that feedback to kind of help shape things moving forward, is my understanding. So I'll be in touch with that stuff. And if y'all have any questions, just let us know. If you're interested in participating in the working group that Rick was talking about, the next steps, I believe, is that they're putting together a working group. If anybody is interested in being part of that, they'll be engaging with board and commission members moving forward through that kind of group to help provide input for the process.
Great. Thanks, Haley. But yeah, so I think, it sounds like we need more information. We all, this is, I feel like, going to be a continued discussion for us on this topic. So,
Okay.
Let's just keep that conversation going. And again, as we talked about, guilty as charged. Hallie shared that information. I just did not get to it. So let's just make sure we keep each other accountable to getting up to speed on all of that info, and let's revisit it next month and that information. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great. So moving along, our next order of business is the ordinance breakdown, and Grani is going to take us through that.
Thank you, Jessica. So I spoke with Daniel, and I have talked about this, and I brought it to Jessica and Rick at our agenda setting meeting. Just sort of looking at one of the core functions of the advisory board is to examine the effectiveness of the ordinance. And although it's one regulation, I think all of you are aware of this, but just working in this every day, Daniel and I are reminded about how, there are small components in this ordinance that are dealt with in a totally different manner from each other. So examples, we've got, a noise disturbance standard, which is a subjective standard, which looks at the time of day, it looks at zoning, looks at frequency, it looks at duration, it looks at amplification. We've got, waste that looks at time of day and zoning district. We've got construction that looks at time of day, day of the week. We've just got so many different sources of noise, types of noise, and different prescriptions within the ordinance as to how we manage and ultimately resolve those noise problems. And I think to be fair to us as a group, we should really look at the different components of the ordinance in a fair bit of detail, so that we're not running the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and making a blanket recommendation about an ordinance that has so many different little pieces. And I know we've talked a lot over the last two meetings, particularly this meeting and the meeting before, about data collection, and so many noise sources are seasonal. I think, as a staff member and a non-voting board member, I think I can very comfortably say that there are at least three components of the noise ordinance that we as staff can bring to the board in very good detail at this moment in time, that are not seasonal, that are not that we don't have trends that are weather related or anything else. These are things that happen day in, day out, regardless of the time of year. And I think the three that I would like to bring to the board are also, there's not really any ambiguity about them. They're people, when people complain about them, they know what the noise is, they know who's making it. It's there's not any gray area. We can get on these and manage them, respond to them, and resolve them in a very good defined way. So I would like to propose, and I'm happy to answer any questions on, but would like to propose that while we're waiting on all of this other data from other sources of noise within the ordinance that we're trying to implement, and also to actually determine the effectiveness on it, that we move ahead with some of these other ones that I think, and I believe we do have adequate data to actually give the board to make some pretty good determinations on. So there's not much more to be said, except that the three areas that I would propose are trash collection, construction, and amplification within 150 feet of a public school where classes are in session, or a medical facility that is seeing patients. I think those are 3 areas that we can examine. I would propose we examine one each month for the next 3 months, which will bring us into June, and really dig down deep into those. We can look at the total number of complaints, where the complaints are coming from, how many repeat complaints we are, and then really present to the board the sort of collaboration, the tools that Daniel and I have to actually work these cases, manage these cases, and ultimately resolve these cases. I think we have very good data to be able to bring to you, and I think it would be a really worthwhile exercise for us as a group to have a look and to really boil down the different components of the ordinance, because they are very, very different, and because they're different, they're handled different, they're managed differently, and they're ultimately resolved differently. So I wanted to bring that to you, like I say, as a board member, and more importantly as a staff member, and happy to throw that open for any discussion, but I think it would be a really worthwhile exercise.
Thank you, Granier. Does anybody want to comment on that? Any questions or comments about going through the noise ordinance sort of piece by piece each month?
Could she repeat those 3 categories?
Sure.
They were trash collection, construction, and amplification within 100 feet of
150 feet of a school in session, or a medical facility seeing patients, attending to patients.
Jeff, you have your hand raised.
Yes, no, I welcome that, actually. I feel like we've been kind of talking about a lot and focusing on what's to come seasonally when we have plenty of things that are sitting out there right now.
Right.
So I support this. Thank you. Thank you, Grania.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Carmelo says, yep. Okay. The next order of business is going to be about mitigation measures, and that is also, we're going to hear from Granier on that.
So thank you, Jessica. So do we, is everybody good with that? Do we need to have a motion for that, Haley, or not? No. Okay. So we will, Daniel and I will bring a detailed report to the board each month. I think probably we'll start with waste collection next month, and we will do a different item for the next 3 months, if that's okay with you guys. Okay. So the other item I have, Jessica, thank you, is again, just going back to the sort of expertise and experience and collective problem solving skills of staff and board members. I had again mentioned to Jessica and Rick in our agenda setting meeting last week that I think it would be a shame to pass over some of the technical expertise we have on this board, particularly in Jeff and Jessica and Carmelo. And I think as a working group would be really helpful for us to look at some methods of mitigation that we can present to our community on our webpage, in our conversations with people. I would hate to waste the resources and the brain power and the experience that you guys bring. And I think it would be a really super quick and efficient, and maybe just a couple of meetings together with you guys to actually provide that service to our community. I think that's what we all are here for at the end of the day, as always, to better our communities. And just given the technical expertise, excuse me, I would really like to ask that of the board, and that maybe I would work with 3 of you in a small group for maybe an hour. I'm sure you guys have tons of ideas, but I would love to have your expertise there so that we can actually communicate that to our community. And excuse me for coughing.
All good. And absolutely, we're definitely happy to do that. In fact, we've already started per our last meeting, brainstorming some different ideas. So I think it'd be great to get together with you now, Granier, with the three of us, and sort of talk through some of the ideas that we have, because we definitely know that we can help in that situation, but also just had some ideas in terms of how some of the information is presented to the community.
I think it's a wonderful gift to our community by having this information available, and to have the kind of technical expertise is really what we want to be able to tap into. So thank you. And I know, Daniel and I are not acoustical engineers, and so we would really value your input on working with us, and then being able for us to be able to confidently give that information out in our community. I think only helps everybody. So maybe we can just gather, I can email you, Jessica, and we can get something together in the next, I would like to do it sooner rather than later, just because obviously we can bring it to the board for the next meeting, but the season will be upon us before we know it. And I think it's important. We're trying to do a lot of proactive work, as you know. It would be nice to be able to have that on our webpage, or have a little handout that we can give out to people. So thank you. If Jeff or Carmela would be willing to participate, Daniel and I would be very grateful, as I'm sure the community at large would be, and your fellow board members. So thank you.
I feel confident we can probably get something on the book so that we can get it out before to get it on the agenda for next board.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Jeff, Carmela, do you have any comments or anything you want to add?
No, not at this time.
No, I'd be happy to talk about what we talked about, but if we would rather save time and go to the next thing, and then we can kind of package everything and have it more compressed and articulated for next time, that sounds good.
Sure, that would be great. This was really just an ask, so thank you, Carmela. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Just for the notes, was the working group established today, or is it going to be discussed again?
I think
I would say it's established. Yeah,
it's established. Great.
Mm-hmm.
And do we have the 3 people that will be on it, or 2 or 3?
Yes, it'll be Jeff, Carmelo, and myself.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I guess I can be on it too then.
And
because I'm a non-voting board member, so I can be on it too. We still don't
great.
That. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now Haley will check in to see if we have any public comment. Is there anybody in the queue?
Let me just refresh it just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Nope, nobody listening in right now.
Okay, great. And we did receive one public comment that was emailed to everyone. Did everyone on the board get a chance to take a look at that? Yeah. Charlie, Jeff, Carmelo, did you all get a chance to take a look at that?
No, where do I find that?
Yeah, I did.
It is in the Google Drive. I'll tell you what. So since you have not had a chance to look at it, I'll go ahead and just read it. And one of the reasons why I do want to read it is because it also brings up what if we're gonna focus on trash collection for next time. That's what it's regarding. So it's basically sorry, I just had it pulled up. Here we go. So it's from somebody that has a condo on South Market Street, and it's in regards to section 1085, and says that it's not working. The section is regarding operating a front end loader for refuge collection in a CBD, in the CBD between the hours of 7 p.m. and 5 a.m. And that there's 4 dumpsters along 48 South Market Street, 1 dumpster behind Biltmore Avenue. In addition, there are residents who live along Biltmore Avenue and workforce housing on Eagle Street that can also hear these dumpsters being dumped. And it's not unusual to hear the 5 or 6 dumpsters being banged empty on a Monday or Thursday morning before 6:30 a.m., which is allowable under the new ordinance. No one likes to be woken from a sound sleep with these metal dumpsters being dumped. Accordingly, the noise of these dumpsters being emptied does disturb or annoy a reasonable person of normal sensitivities and causes or tends to cause an adverse effect on the public health and welfare. In addition, this repetitive, impulsive sound from 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. should be at the decibel sound of 62, which I'm sure it exceeds since it jolts most people awake. The revised ordinance is not working. Please change the ordinance with later hours. If that's not possible, would it be feasible to use heavy-duty plastic dumpsters for garbage collection in the CBD? They use them in Hawaii, and it's a lot quieter than the metal ones. I'm sure there is some study on the decibel levels when a front-end loader empties a plastic dumpster versus a metal one. Thanks for your consideration.